Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The crack of fracturing timber ripped Leo from sleep. A disorienting moment, a phantom echo of some half-forgotten dream, quickly dissolved. Then came the voices, low, gravelly, insistent, and emphatically not his wife's. In that instant, the idyllic retreat Clara and he had meticulously planned curdled into something monstrous. Months they'd spent anticipating this, a week ensconced in timber and silence, a haven severed from the clamor of their ordinary lives. No insistent chime of phones, no glow of screens, just the two of them adrift in tranquility. The cabin, discovered through flickering online images, promised seclusion, a quaint structure embraced by deep woods, leagues from any semblance of town, a scene seemingly lifted from a painted landscape. Their arrival coincided with late Friday's descending sun painting the tree line in hues of fire and amber. It was precisely as imagined, rustic charm fused with unexpected comfort, dominated by a hearth of river stones and windows framing an unbroken expanse of forest. Unpacking, Leo recalled the profound quietude, a silence punctuated only by the descant of unseen birds and the soughing breath of wind through ancient pines. That inaugural evening unfolded like a half-remembered courtship. They traced winding paths around the cabin, fingers interlaced, shadows lengthening beside them. As darkness claimed the woods, they retreated to the fireside glow, a shared bottle of wine, loosening tongues, and laughter, rediscovering rhythms lost to routine. The world felt contracted to just the two of them, nestled in the heart of the wilderness, a fragile, fleeting illusion. The shattering intrusion occurred their second night. Exhausted from a day spent navigating sun-dappled trails, they had surrendered early to sleep. The precise hour remains elusive, lost somewhere in the deep well past midnight, when the sound first pierced the quiet. A falling branch, perhaps. Leo's drowsy mind offered the benign explanation, immediately refuted by the hushed, urgent voices seeping under the door. Ice traced a path down his spine. "The bedroom," a rasping whisper commanded. "Quiet now." He nudged Clara awake, a swift pressure of his finger against her lips, conveying the immediate peril. Her eyes, moments before soft with sleep, flared wide with terror as the stealthy tread of footsteps neared their door. A frantic gesture directed her beneath the heavy bed frame. Leo positioned himself flush against the wall behind the door, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, a betraying rhythm he prayed they couldn't hear. Slowly, agonizingly, the door handle turned. The hinges groaned a low protest. Leo held his breath, every sinew pulled taut. A silhouette filled the doorway, tall, thick-set, cradling the unmistakable shape of a shotgun. Thought evaporated, replaced by raw, unthinking instinct. He threw his weight against the door, slamming it into the intruder with desperate force. A guttural grunt of pain and surprise escaped the man as he stumbled forward, the weapon skittering across the wooden floorboards. Leo launched himself after it, his hand closing over the frigid steel just as the man fought for balance. A tangle of limbs, a desperate scramble across the floor, each vying for control of the deadly firearm. "What's that noise?" A different voice echoed from the main room. "Silas, you all right in there?" With a final violent wrench, Leo tore the shotgun free. He scrambled upright, leveling the weapon at his assailant. The man, Silas, froze, hands instinctively rising. "Stay put," Leo managed, his voice a ragged facsimile of command. "Clara, get out, now, we're leaving." She emerged from beneath the bed, a ghost pale with fear. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, sounded from the cabin's central living area. The others were moving. "Wait!" Silas pleaded, his tone low, urgent. "You don't get it. We're not gonna hurt you, just need a place. Lie low for a bit." "Shut up!" Leo snapped, the adrenaline lending his voice a sharp edge. "Clara, phones, keys, go." But as Clara reached for the nightstand, the bedroom door flew inward again. Two more figures stormed the room, both armed. Leo swung the shotgun arc towards them, his finger finding the trigger's curve. "Whoa, easy, easy," one shouted, hands raised placatingly. "Everyone just take a breath." A tableau of tension. Leo clutching the shotgun, Clara a trembling shield behind him, and three menacing strangers blocking their sole path to freedom. Sweat prickled Leo's brow. His arm began to tremble under the unfamiliar weight of the weapon. "Look," said the apparent leader Vance, his voice attempting reason. "No trouble needed. We got ourselves in a tight spot. Need to hole up maybe a day, 2 tops. You let us stay. Keep your mouths shut. Everybody walks. Sound fair?" A harsh bark of laughter escaped Leo. "You smash into our sanctuary at night, waving guns, and expect us to play host? Who in God's name are you?" Vance exhaled slowly, lowering his own weapon fractionally. "You really gotta know? Fine. Hit a bank back in town. Didn't go smooth, need the heat to blow over. That's the long and short." The words struck Leo like physical blows. Bank robbers, actual desperate bank robbers, held them captive. Reality fractured, tilting into nightmare. "Please," Clara whispered, her voice thin and reedy from behind him. "Let us go. We won't say anything, I promise." Vance shook his head, a grim finality in the gesture. "Can't risk it, can't have you running off. But look, we ain't monsters. You two just cooperate, stay quiet. This'll blow over quick." Leo recognized the futility. Even armed, they were drastically outnumbered. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the shotgun. "Good choice," Vance approved. "All right then, let's all relocate to the living room. Silas, tie 'em up, not too tight." The ensuing hours drifted by in a haze of surreal dread. Leo and Clara sat bound on the worn sofa, unwilling spectators as the criminals commandeered their temporary home. They plundered their carefully packed provisions, uncorked their wine, their voices rising and falling in agitated discussion about their next move. Names surfaced amidst the arguments: Vance, the clear leader, Silas, the heavy, and Finn, the youngest, visibly ill at ease. Snippets revealed a botched robbery, talk of gunfire, an exploding dye pack contaminating the loot. They were jumpy, frayed at the edges. As dawn bled gray light through the cabin windows, casting long, skeletal shadows, Leo began to piece together a fragile strategy. He'd observed Finn, the youngest of the trio, casting furtive, troubled glances towards Clara and him. Guilt seemed etched onto his features. If Leo could isolate him, perhaps appeal to that flicker of conscience. The opportunity presented itself mid-morning. Vance and Silas ventured outside, ostensibly to scout the perimeter, leaving Finn as their reluctant guard. The moment the door clicked shut, Leo spoke, pitching his voice low, calm. "Hey, Finn, you don't look like the rest of them. How'd you fall in with this crew?" The young man started, eyes wide. Look, it's messy. Needed cash. Vance said, easy score. Didn't know." His voice trailed off. "It's not too late," Leo pressed gently. "Help us leave. We can tell the police you were coerced. You could walk away from this, have a life." Conflict warred visibly in Finn's expression. He gnawed nervously at his lower lip. For a heart-stopping second, Leo thought he'd broken through. Then the cabin door swung open, Vance re-entering, and Finn instantly recoiled into silence. The day stretched, taut and interminable. Closely supervised bathroom trips were permitted. Sips of water offered, stale crackers shared. The robbers' arguments intensified, their nerves stretched thin as they debated escape routes, whispered about rendezvous points, a boat supposedly waiting somewhere downstream. Hope began to dwindle in Leo's chest. Who would even know they were missing? They'd told everyone they'd be unreachable for the week. By the time concern turned to alarm, it could be fatally late. Then, deep into the second night of their captivity, came the sound that changed everything. A distant, rising keening, faint but unmistakable, police sirens. The robbers froze mid-argument, raw panic flaring in their eyes. How the hell?" Vance snarled, snatching up his rifle. "Finn, you little snake! You call someone!" Finn shook his head violently, hands flapping in denial. "No, swear to God, Vance, I didn't." Amidst their panicked accusations, Leo caught Clara's eye. A minute, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. He understood. Earlier, during a moment of distraction, she had somehow managed to trigger the emergency SOS on her smartwatch. Help, improbable as it seemed, was converging on their remote prison. Chaos erupted. Vance and Silas scrambled, grabbing weapons and stained moneybags, preparing for flight. Finn remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed by indecision. Louder now, the sirens screamed through the pines. Seizing the confusion, Leo strained against his bindings, the rope finally giving way. Hands free, he lunged for the shotgun the robbers had carelessly leaned against the wall. "Nobody move," he yelled, the weapon's weight familiar now, swinging it towards the frantic criminals. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Then Vance raised his pistol, aiming squarely at Leo's chest. Leo watched, detached, as the man's finger tightened on the trigger, a certainty settling over him that this was the end. The gunshot exploded in the confined space, deafeningly loud. But the expected impact never came. Leo blinked his eyes open. Vance lay crumpled on the floorboards, clutching a bleeding shoulder. Above him stood Finn, a small, shaking pistol grasped in his white-knuckled hand. "I couldn't," Finn stammered, his voice cracking. "Couldn't let you kill him." The next moments dissolved into a whirlwind. Blue flashing lights painted the cabin interior as police officers swarmed the scene, their commands sharp and authoritative. Leo and Clara were guided outside, wrapped in coarse blankets, their vital signs checked by solicitous paramedics. As the adrenaline finally ebbed, a violent, uncontrollable trembling seized Leo. In the aftermath, days blurred into a sequence of police stations and repeated statements. They learned the details. The bank robbery had indeed gone awry, a security guard wounded but alive. Finn's cooperation, corroborated by their testimony, earned him a measure of leniency his companions would not receive. Leo and Clara returned home, back to the familiar contours of their lives, yet irrevocably altered. Loud noises made them flinch. Sleep offered little respite. Paradoxically, though, the shared terror forged a new tensile strength between them. They had stared into the abyss together and emerged, scarred but intact. They never returned to the cabin in the woods, but sometimes caught in the quiet currents of an ordinary evening, their eyes meet in silent acknowledgement. They remember the swiftness with which sanctuary became prison, the razor-thin membrane separating safety from peril, and they hold each other a little closer, fiercely grateful for the fragile peace, keenly aware that everything can shatter in the space of a heartbeat. The ancient oak groaned its protest as Elias nudged it inward, the shriek of tortured hinges echoing down the cavernous main aisle of the repository. Silence answered him, profound and absolute, save for the faint, insistent ticking of some unseen chronometer. Midnight lay hours past. A solitary lamp cast a lonely pool of light upon the vacant front desk, an island in the surrounding gloom. The night watchman, a man sculpted from shadows and indifference, had granted him passage until dawn, conditional on monastic quietude, a promise readily given. Elias sought but a single codex, its reference scribbled on a frayed note tucked within his coat. He navigated the first corridor of towering shelves, each footfall coaxing a fresh complaint from the warped floorboards beneath. The air hung thick, redolent of generations of dust, decaying paper, and the phantom sweetness of old varnish. Dark wood, polished by time and countless hands, formed the shelves that rose like monoliths into the upper dimness. Above, antique fixtures dispensed a jaundiced luminescence, weak and hesitant. Bulbs sputtered intermittently, threatening darkness. No hum of climate control softened the stillness, only that distant metronomic tick-tock. Locating the call number etched onto a brass plaque, his fingers ghosted across the spines of venerable hardcovers, their leather cracked like drought-stricken earth, titles often lost to abrasion and age. At last, he found it, the manuscript, swaddled in coarse, dun-colored fabric that felt desiccated and faintly abrasive to the touch. Clutching his prize, he carried it to a nearby reading table, its surface scarred, its legs uneven. Setting the manuscript down provoked a slight wobble. The heavy chair he dragged forth scraped violently against the floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet. He eased open the cover. The pages within were yellowed, stiff with antiquity. He turned a leaf, then another, squinting at the calligraphy. An arcane script, utterly foreign, resisting comprehension. As he focused, attempting to decipher the alien shapes of the letters, a sound pricked the silence, a muffled laugh, brief and dry. Elias looked up sharply, nothing but shadowed stacks, receding into the gloom. He waited, breath held, then bent again to the text. He turned another brittle page. There it was again. That same quiet amusement seeming not to emanate from the room, but to rustle from between the brittle pages themselves. Leaning closer, straining his ears, he heard only the tireless clock and the low thrum of the aged electrics. A prickle of unease prompted him to turn, to survey the aisles behind him. Rows of shelves marched away into the dimness. But surely there were more now. He remembered perhaps 5, 6 ranks deep. Now they seemed to stretch 8, 10, an impossible proliferation. He stepped away from the table, his gaze tracing the intricate grain of the floorboards, seeking normalcy, finding none. Something felt fundamentally awry. Glancing back towards the entrance where open space should have been, he saw only the dense barricade of more bookshelves. He took a few hesitant steps back the way he'd come, discovering the corridor between the stacks had subtly shifted, bent into a curve where moments before a straight path had lain. The table itself seemed displaced relative to his point of entry. Fatigue, perhaps. He rubbed his eyes, hoping to dispel the illusion. Returning to the manuscript, he drew the small table lamp nearer, its bulb humming a low, insistent note. He flipped another page. A tiny chuckle, unmistakable, seemed to lift directly from the ink. Gooseflesh pebbled his arms, his throat constricted. Gently, reverently, he closed the cloth-bound volume and rose to his feet. A breath of air, a moment outside this oppressive stillness. That was what he needed. He looked for the entrance. It had been just behind him, perhaps 20 paces. Now only shelves met his gaze, an unbroken wall of wood and paper. He circled the table, peered down an aisle to his left. It plunged into a darkness deeper and longer than geometry allowed. He tried another. More shelves. Turning slowly, scanning the perimeter, he found no hint of the front desk, no welcoming outline of the door. His heart hammered against his ribs. A damp sheen slicked his forehead. He swallowed against a dry throat. Hello? The word died, absorbed by the infinite books. He cleared his throat, tried again, louder. Is anyone here? Silence answered, thick and mocking. Then a faint scraping, metal on wood. Something sharp dragged across the floor somewhere nearby. The instant he focused on it, the sound ceased. He took a tentative step in its direction. Overhead, the lights flickered violently. The scent of varnish, cloying and strong, filled his nostrils. No windows pierced these walls, no emergency signs offered escape. Only the sickly lamps and the labyrinthine shelves. He tried to retrace his path. Straight in from the entrance, find the manuscript, sit at the table. Simple. Yet now the architecture denied this memory, denied the existence of an entrance at all. He plunged down an aisle flanked by towering shelves crammed with somber volumes, their spines a muted tapestry of browns and blacks. Each aisle mirrored the last. Reaching the end, he turned right, expecting a wall, a boundary. Instead, another corridor stretched before him. He hurried along it, a rising panic quickening his steps, only to find himself inexplicably back beside the reading table, the manuscript lying where he'd left it. A circle. He was trapped in a loop. Snatching up the volume, tucking it under his arm, he thought perhaps returning it might break the spell. He recalled the exact shelf, the specific location. He went there. The labeled shelf was gone, replaced by another, bearing unfamiliar titles. He checked adjacent aisles, then others further afield. The original spot had vanished. The manuscript, clutched tight, felt strangely heavy now, its earlier laughter silenced, replaced by a dense, palpable weight. The lights stuttered again, casting strobe-like shadows. A low vibration traveled through the floorboards, accompanied by a deep groan as if something immense had shifted. Glancing over his shoulder, Elias saw it, a towering bookshelf, slid ponderously sideways, its base scarring the wooden floor. His breath hitched. He fought for calm, though his pulse raced and his mouth felt like sand. There was no rational explanation, yet the evidence was irrefutable. The shelves were moving, rearranging the very structure of the library around him. He needed a wall, an outer boundary. Surely the library wasn't infinite. He chose a direction and walked, forcing himself forward, resisting the urge to turn down branching aisles. Time stretched. Minutes bled into an eternity of receding shelves. Finally, exhausted, he stopped, resting a hand against a cool stack of books. He pushed onward. After several more minutes of determined progress, he reached a corner, and in that corner, a door, narrow, with a small, grimy glass panel set high within it. He seized the handle, locked solid. He rattled it, pushed, pulled. Futile. Knocking produced only a dull, flat thud, swallowed instantly by the surrounding silence. The scraping sound returned, closer now, just beyond the door. Pressing his ear to the cool wood, he listened intently. Nothing. He tried the handle again, immovable. Turning back, he faced another long aisle receding into the jaundiced light. The buzzing of the lamps seemed louder now, more insistent. The air tasted of lemon oil and decay. He walked slowly, his legs leaden with fatigue. A flicker of movement caught his eye, his own reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher cabinet. His face stared back, pale, drawn, beaded with sweat. He felt the crumpled paper in his jacket pocket, the now useless reference number. It seemed irrelevant, a relic from a different reality. As he moved, the floor felt subtly tilted beneath his feet. Then a whisper, insidious and close, breathed his name. Elias. He froze. He hadn't spoken his name, hadn't signed in, hadn't encountered anyone to tell. How? He scanned the shadowed spaces between the shelves. Nothing, just books and failing light. The voice, low and rough as rust, whispered it again. Elias, then fell silent. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. Only the echo answered. He moved cautiously toward the source of the whisper, reaching another reading table, identical to the first but inexplicably relocated. He looked down at his arm. The manuscript was gone. He was holding nothing. He couldn't recall setting it down. Whipping around, he saw it lying open on the table he'd just approached. He knew he had been carrying it. Hesitantly, he drew near, peering at the exposed page. The ink seemed faded, the script tight, slanted, impenetrable. He traced a line with his finger. The paper felt strangely warm beneath his touch. Lifting his hand, he rubbed finger and thumb together, finding a faint, gritty residue, and then the laughter again, a stifled giggle, brief as a moth's wing beat. He slammed the manuscript shut, shoving it away from him across the scarred wood. The scraping noise returned, louder, closer. Behind him, a bookshelf ground its way across the aisle, wooden feet gouging the floor, sealing the path. He lurched forward only to see another shelf slide into place before him, cutting off his advance. Trapped. He spotted a narrow gap to his left and squeezed through just as another towering unit threatened to close the space entirely. He found himself in a small alcove, a reader's nook furnished with a single worn armchair, a low table, and a lamp whose switch was jammed immovably in the on position. He touched the bulb, searingly hot. He snatched his hand back, rubbing it against his trousers, forcing slow, deep breaths against the rising tide of panic. Elias. The whisper again from behind the shelves flanking the nook. He stood, holding his breath, and crept toward the sound. Between two towering stacks he perceived a shape, tall, slender, indistinct in the poor light. Before he could speak, it melted back into the deeper shadows. He rushed to the spot, no gap, no doorway, just solid shelves. "I just want to leave," he said aloud, his voice thin and shaky. "I'm sorry if I disturbed anything. I won't take the manuscript." No answer came, only the unnerving sound of nails, or something like them, scratching rhythmically against the floorboards nearby. A tremor ran through him. He cast about for a weapon, anything. His hand closed around the reassuring heft of a thick, leather-bound volume. He gripped it tightly, his palms slick with sweat. He moved forward inch by cautious inch, staying low, peering around corners. Every attempt to move towards where he thought the exit must lie was thwarted by the groaning, scraping relocation of the shelves. The lights flickered, casting the shifting labyrinth in a disorienting dance of light and shadow. His sense of direction utterly failed him. He tried focusing on small details, seeking landmarks. A small brass plaque on one end cap. He remembered passing it earlier. He tried backtracking, moving in the opposite direction. After several minutes of tense navigation, he reached a corner that felt subtly different. A glass door bearing a sign whose text swam illegibly before his eyes. He tried the handle. It felt loose, yielding. He pulled. The door swung inward, revealing a small, cramped office. He slipped inside. Quiet reigned here. A simple wooden desk, a green-shaded banker's lamp, a tall filing cabinet. He checked the desk drawers. Empty but for paperclips and a desiccated pen. He lifted the receiver of the Bakelite telephone. Dead silence. Behind the desk, a window, its frame swollen, painted firmly shut. Pressing his forehead to the cool glass, he peered out into impenetrable darkness. No moon, no streetlights, only the vague, menacing silhouettes of what might have been trees. The frame felt immensely solid. Leaving the sanctuary of the office, he found himself deposited into yet another corridor, this one arrow straight. Far in the distance, a familiar beacon, the lone lamp illuminating the front desk. Hope surged. He quickened his pace, his shoes squeaking on the polished wood. The desk drew nearer, the main entrance visible just beyond it. He broke into a run, refusing to look back, straining his ears against the silence, half expecting the scraping, the laughter, the whispered name. Nothing. The massive entrance door stood closed, but a thin line of light glowed beneath it. He grasped the heavy brass handle, turned. It didn't budge. Locked. He threw his shoulder against the solid wood. The frame rattled violently but held fast. Stepping back, panting, he scanned the now still library. The silence felt heavier than sound. Then directly behind him, the voice. Elias. He spun around. A blurred figure coalesced in the shadows between shelves, perhaps 10 feet away. It tilted its head, observing him with unnerving stillness. He took a hesitant step forward. It retreated instantly, dissolving back into the darkness. "What do you want?" he yelled, the sound raw in his throat. No reply. He scrubbed a hand over his face, teeth clenched. Turning back to the door, renewed desperation fueled him. He twisted the handle with all his strength, yanking, lifting. Nothing. He grabbed a ponderous dictionary from a nearby shelf and slammed it repeatedly against the handle mechanism. A clang of tortured metal. The door seemed to shudder, to give slightly. He tried the handle again. It turned, just a fraction. He jammed his foot into the opening, prying, straining, widening the gap inch by painful inch until he could finally squeeze through. He stumbled out into the main building hallway. Here, the lights burned steady and bright, reflecting off cool, tiled floors. The oppressive atmosphere vanished, replaced by the faint antiseptic smell of old cleaning solutions. He glanced back at the library door. It was closed. He tried the handle from this side, locked tight. Through the small glass panel, the interior looked utterly normal. Shelves in orderly rows, the silent front desk, the empty reading area. Nothing stirred. The lights within were stable. No laughter echoed. No voice whispered. He walked quickly down the corridor towards the building's main entrance. The large glass doors at the front yielded easily. He pushed one open and stepped out into the cool, damp night air. The sky remained a starless shroud. A lone car hummed past on the distant street. He stood for a long moment, drawing ragged breaths, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving behind an aching soreness in his muscles, his shirt clinging damply to his back. Elias. His name, whispered by the impossible. He didn't understand. Right now, understanding felt less important than escape. Taking hesitant steps away from the imposing facade, he looked back one last time. The old library stood silent, its windows dark eyes in a stoned face, the heavy oak door firmly shut. It appeared ordinary, mundane. Nothing moved. No sound escaped. He turned away resolutely and walked, putting one foot in front of the other until he passed through the main gate and out onto the empty street. He did not look back again. Stillness should have been the defining characteristic of the Ptolemaic urn, yet the security monitor offered irrefutable, chilling proof otherwise. Frame by frame, stark in the low-resolution glow, the artifact performed its silent, impossible waltz. A cold dread seeped into my marrow. This single, inexplicable event was the prelude, I sensed, to a night where the veil between ages would fray, unraveling the very fabric of the reality I inhabited. For half a year, the City Museum's echoing halls had served as my nocturnal sanctuary, a quiet post, this night watchman gig, affording a student of antiquity like myself ample solitude for poring over dense texts. The true challenge, most nights, lay merely in battling slumber amidst the sepulchral hush. Tonight, however, sleep was a forgotten country. The shift began under unremarkable auspices. 10 o'clock brought the familiar ritual, relieving the day shift sentinel, embarking on the first circuit of checks. Shadows stretched, long and skeletal, from plinths and display cases under the austere emergency lighting. A familiar haunting I believed I'd grown immune to. Foolish assumption. It was near the midnight hour, eyes scanning the bank of monitors, when the anomaly snagged my attention. Camera 4, trained on the heart of the Nile collection, depicted its crown jewel, a 4,000-year-old funerary urn, subtly yet undeniably displaced, a fractional shift to the left. I blinked, rubbed tired eyes, spooled back the recording. The evidence persisted. One moment the urn stood sentinel in its designated coordinates. The next, it occupied a space infinitesimally, yet definitively altered. Impossible. The word escaped my lips, a dry whisper in the vast quiet. I knew that exhibit intimately. The urn, a hefty piece of history, resided secure behind reinforced vitrine, immovable. A phantom in the machine, surely, a glitch in the tired circuitry. Thus armed with rational denial, I rose to investigate. Yet, drawing closer to the Egyptian wing, a disquiet settled upon me, heavy as sarcophagus stone. The very air felt different, charged with a latent energy, reminiscent of the pregnant calm preceding a violent storm. At first glance within the gallery, all seemed undisturbed. The urn sat upon its pedestal, hieroglyphs inscrutable in the dim wash of light. But proximity shattered the illusion. With a jolt that resonated deep in my bones, I saw it. The urn was repositioned. The meticulously painted Eye of Ra, eternally facing the gallery's center, now peered obliquely, its ancient gaze turned fractionally askew. Ice traced a path along my vertebrae. My certainty, moments before a shield of logic, now lay shattered at my feet. A dry, insistent rasping emanated from the closet, escalating from a hesitant scrape to a desperate scrabble. I became utterly still, the dense theories of cognitive dissonance dissolving from my grasp, forgotten on my lap. Whatever lurked within that shadowed space craved egress, and a primal dread coiled in my stomach at the thought of discovering its form. My name is Alara. Until this particular Tuesday bled towards Wednesday, my universe revolved around the impending doom of a behavioral neuroscience exam. How swiftly the mundane anxieties evaporate when confronted by the potential reality of things that shouldn't exist. It began, as these things perhaps often do, amidst the banal. A late-night siege of study within my sterile dorm room, propelled by questionable amounts of caffeine and the creeping certainty of academic failure. My roommate Chloe was elsewhere, likely navigating the familiar currents of some off-campus gathering, a pang of envy, her effortless straddling of study and social spheres, while I drowned here in a fluorescent sea of textbooks and regret. The initial sound was negligible, almost subliminal, a faint tick-tick scrape. I lifted my head, tilting it, straining to isolate the noise from the dormitory's usual nocturnal symphony. The thumping bass bleeding through cinder-block walls, indistinct murmurs from the corridor, the geriatric groan of my miniature refrigerator. Dismissing it as fatigue-induced fancy, I returned my gaze to the page. Then, again, a soft, rhythmic abrasion, unnervingly like fingernails drawn across old wood. Its origin was undeniable: the closet. My pulse quickened, a frantic drummer against my ribs. The textbook slid from my lap as my attention locked onto the unassuming white door. Is anyone there? The question felt absurd, leaving my lips like a fool's errand. What response did I anticipate? Only the room's stale air answered. A shaky exhalation escaped me, a laugh bordering on hysteria. My hand raked through tangled hair. "Control yourself, Ilara," I breathed. "Stress is making you hallucinate." Resolutely, I retrieved the book, commanding my focus, but the letters swam, refusing to cohere. My concentration, a fragile thing at best, had shattered. Every few seconds, my eyes flickered involuntarily towards the closet, a morbid fascination anticipating the slow creak of the door swinging open. It was then the scratching erupted in earnest. No ambiguity now. A frantic, clawing sound that prickled the skin along my spine and raised the fine hairs on my arms. Breath hitched. I stared, transfixed, my thoughts a chaotic scramble. A trapped rodent, some impossibly large insect. How? Slowly, deliberately, I rose, limbs trembling like nascent wings. One instinct screamed, flee, bolt down the hallway, seek refuge in numbers, in light. But a stronger, more perilous curiosity, a lifelong character flaw, drew me inexorably forward. My fingers, slick with sudden sweat, trembled as they closed around the cool metal of the doorknob. The scrabbling within intensified, a frenzy born of proximity, as if the hidden occupant sensed my approach. Drawing a ragged breath, bracing for the unknown, I wrenched the door wide. An instant of normality, my clothes hanging in their predictable rows. Then, as my pupils dilated against the interior gloom, I saw it, a shape huddled low in the far corner, obscured by the fall of winter coats. I stumbled back, a cry lodging itself hard and sharp in my throat. Before the sound could escape, the figure exploded into motion, a blur of impossible speed. One moment shrouded in darkness, the next directly before me. A hand, surprisingly strong, clamped over my mouth, stifling the belated scream. My gaze collided with eyes that were wide, wild, and profoundly desperate. "Please," the figure gasped, the voice thin, reedy. A girl, young, likely my own age. "You must help. They are coming." I tore her hand away, stumbling backward until my hip struck the sharp corner of my desk. "Who are you?" The words trembled, laced with disbelief and fear. "How did you get into my closet?" Her eyes darted nervously towards the darkened window pane, then snapped back to me. "No time. Explanations are a luxury. Any moment they will be here. Hide me, please." "Hide you? From who? What is happening?" The questions spilled out, a torrent of confusion overwhelming my shock. She opened her mouth, a response forming, but a sound tore through the relative quiet of the night, shattering the moment, a howl, long and threaded with sorrow, yet underpinned by something predatory, something ravenous. The color leached from the girl's face, leaving her skin like bleached parchment. "They're here," she whispered, the words barely audible. Drawn by an awful magnetism, I moved to the window, peering down into the quad below. Darkness yielded nothing initially. Then a flicker of movement, amorphous blots bleeding across the manicured lawn with unnatural celerity. Their trajectory was unmistakable, directly towards this building. "What are they?" I breathed, voice a ghost of itself. The girl materialized beside me, her frame taut as a drawn bowstring. "Hunters," she stated flatly. "They hunt me. They will not cease until I am found." I turned, truly seeing her for the first time under the weak glow of my desk lamp. Her pallor was extreme, almost translucent. Her clothes were ragged, smeared with grime, testament to a long flight. But it was her eyes that held me captive, ancient eyes filled with a weariness that warred strangely with the youthfulness of her features. "Why? Why are they hunting you?" The question escaped even as a rational part of my brain shrieked warnings against further entanglement. She met my stare, and for a fleeting second, something flickered deep within her irises, something not quite human. "Because of what I am," she murmured. "Because of this." As if demonstrating a simple parlor trick, she extended her hand, palm upward. Before my incredulous eyes, a small, vibrant flame bloomed in her palm, licking the air, dancing with an impossible, intrinsic life. I recoiled, stumbling again, my mind struggling to reconcile the sight with reality. This wasn't possible. Such things belong to fiction, to fantasy, not to a third-floor dorm room late on a Tuesday. Another howl ripped the night air, closer now, chillingly close. The girl clenched her fist, extinguishing the flame. Her eyes pleaded. "Please," she urged. "I know this appears insane. I understand you have no cause to trust me. But if they capture me, death is the kindest outcome, and they show no mercy to those who obstruct them." My gaze flickered back to the window. The shadows, the hunters, were now at the dormitory entrance. Seconds, maybe minutes, before they reached this floor. Before they reached... A decision coalesced, sharp and sudden. A choice that irrevocably altered the trajectory of my existence. "All right," I said, surprised at the steadiness in my own voice. "I'll help. What do we do?" Relief washed over her features, stark against her pallor. "Thank you," she breathed, the words heavy with gratitude. Then, abruptly businesslike, "We must leave. Now. Is there another way out? Not the main stairs?" I nodded numbly. "Fire escape, end of the hall, but it's 3 floors down." "Acceptable. I can manage the descent." She offered her hand. "Do you trust me?" A heartbeat's hesitation. The chasm between my known world and this sudden, terrifying unknown. Then I took her hand. It felt unnaturally warm, almost feverish. "I must be utterly mad," I muttered. A grim smile touched her lips. "Perhaps, but madness is preferable to termination." We moved with frantic efficiency, grabbing my backpack, stuffing in essentials with trembling hands, wallet, keys, phone. As we reached the door, I paused, glancing back at the small island of my former life, the open textbook, the scattered notes. surreal, a relic from a forgotten era, mere minutes old. "We must go," the girl insisted, her grip tightening on my hand. I nodded, wrenching my gaze away. Slipping into the dimly lit corridor, the sound of heavy, pounding footsteps ascending the stairwell reached us. The hunters were inside the building. We fled down the hallway, our sneakers silent on the worn, industrial carpet. The red exit sign glowed at the corridor's terminus, a beacon in the oppressive dimness. Just as we reached the fire escape door, a dorm room door behind us crashed open. A backward glance, instantly regretted. The entity framed in the doorway was only vaguely humanoid, its form rippling, indistinct, like heat haze solidified, struggling to hold a single shape. "Run!" the girl screamed, shoving me through the heavy metal door. The frigid night air assaulted my face as we tumbled onto the narrow metal platform. Without pause, the girl vaulted over the railing, pulling me with her into the abyss. A scream tried to claw its way out, but lodged in my throat as we plummeted. Then, impossibly, our fall arrested. Not stopped, but slowed, cushioned, a buoyant deceleration as if gravity had momentarily forgotten its claim. We landed with jarring softness on the damp grass below. Above, guttural snarls mingled with the shriek of tortured metal as the hunters reached the fire escape. "This way!" the girl urged, already sprinting towards the dark fringe of trees bordering the campus. "The woods, we can lose them there." I followed, legs pumping, automatically, mind numb. Crossing the open quad felt like traversing an eternity under unseen, malevolent eyes. A heavy thud sounded behind us. The hunters, eschewing the stairs, had leaped from the third floor. We plunged into the tree line just as another ululating cry split the night. I risked a look back, a mistake. They were gaining, their mutable forms shifting as they ran. Now lupine, now ursine, always terrifyingly fast. The girl navigated the dense woods with an uncanny familiarity, weaving through tangled undergrowth and ancient oaks. I stumbled behind, branches lashing my face, unseen roots conspiring to trip me. "Where are we going?" I gasped, lungs burning. "A sanctuary," she panted, her voice strained. "A place they cannot enter, if we can reach it." More questions burned, but breath was a precious commodity. The sounds of pursuit gradually diminished, swallowed by the muffling embrace of the forest, though a primal instinct warned against complacency. Finally, after an indeterminate passage of time that felt like hours compressed into minutes, we burst into a small circular clearing. Bathed in ethereal moonlight, a ring of weathered standing stones dominated the space, pulsing with a faint internal luminescence. The girl pulled me towards them. "Quickly!" she commanded. "Inside the circle." I hesitated at the perimeter, a wave of profound unreality washing over me. This was sheer lunacy, magic flames, shape-shifting monsters, glowing stones. A howl, terrifyingly close, shattered my hesitation. I stepped across the unseen threshold into the circle. The transition was instantaneous. A gentle warmth suffused my being, and the ambient sounds of the forest, the whisper of leaves, the distant pursuit, faded into absolute silence. It was like stepping into a pocket dimension, insulated and serene. The girl sank to her knees, relief palpable in the slump of her shoulders. "Safe," she murmured, "for this moment. Safe." I stared at her, this enigmatic catalyst who had detonated my ordinary world in less than an hour. "Who are you?" I asked again, the question imbued with a new weight. "Truly?" She met my gaze, a faint, sorrowful smile touching her lips. "My name is Lyra," she said softly, "and I am about to unravel everything you believed you knew about existence." As Lyra began to speak, her voice low and steady in the sudden stillness, I settled onto the cool earth beside her. The behavioral neuroscience exam seemed a laughable, trivial concern now, a faded photograph from a life already lived. Whatever narrative was about to unfold, whatever monstrous realities now governed my world, one truth resonated with absolute clarity. Normalcy was a shattered concept, and strangely, terrifyingly, a part of me embraced the precipice. It began down in the cellar's gloom, where forgotten things go to decay. I, Silas, was wrestling with boxes, dislodging strata of forgotten detritus, when my torch beam snagged on something tucked behind mildewed cartons. A telephone's silhouette emerged from the shadows. Heavy bakelite, a rotary dial like a sightless eye, a handset dense as river stone. It felt solid, icily indifferent. My sleeve wiped away a shroud of dust. Though its cord seemed brittle, a relic frayed by time, the instrument itself possessed a strange, stubborn integrity. An oddity, I mused, perhaps a conversation piece for upstairs. I hefted its surprising weight, carried it into the relative light of my living room, and settled it on a small mahogany end table beside the worn armchair. The wall jack accepted the plug, a loose, uncertain connection. That first night, weariness pulled me under around midnight. The basement's damp breath, a miasma of mold and earth, still clung to my lungs despite the cleaner air upstairs. Sleep was a shallow tide. Then, somewhere in the pre-dawn stillness, perhaps 3 o'clock, a sound pierced the quiet. A ringing. My eyes snapped open. I sat bolt upright in the dark. It was the antique phone. Its ring wasn't a melody, but a sharp, insistent buzz, a brief shriek repeating every few seconds. I stood, suspended in the blackness, uncertain. My bedroom remained unlit. The hallway stretched silent, bare feet padding on cool floorboards. I navigated towards the living room. I flicked the switch, bathing the room in stark light, and advanced on the phone. Hesitantly, I lifted the receiver. Silence from my end. I waited, listening intently. A sound met my ear like the measured cadence of respiration from the other side. Slow, deliberate, unnervingly steady. No words, no hiss of static, merely the intimate rhythm of breath drawn in, expelled. It defied logic. My own voice, when I finally found it, was a rough croak. "Hello?" No reply came, just that ceaseless, patient breathing. "Who is this?" I demanded louder this time. Still nothing but the sound of unseen lungs working. After perhaps 15 taut seconds, I terminated the connection, replacing the heavy handset. The wall clock confirmed the hour, just past 3. The following day was an exercise in deliberate distraction. Work, dinner, the flickering blue light of the television. Normalcy asserted itself. Yet the phone remained, an obsidian presence on the end table. Unplugging it crossed my mind, but a morbid curiosity stayed my hand. Would it ring again? Perhaps faulty wiring, crossed signals, rational explanations flickered and died. That night, punctually, it did ring. Again I answered. Again the breathing, identical in its slow, controlled pace. "Hey," I projected, voice firmer now. "Who are you?" Emptiness answered. "Talk to me." Only the rhythmic breath. I hung up, heart hammering against my ribs. A quick check of the line yielded only dead air, no dial tone, nothing. On the third night, sleep was a distant shore. I resolved to wait, a sentinel in the darkened living room. Nerves frayed, I sat hunched in a chair, eyes fixed on the phone. An ugly, archaic thing, really. Its rotary dial bore the ghosts of countless fingers. Numbers faded into the plastic. Nothing outwardly sinister marked it. I focused on keeping my own breathing even. Around the same impossible hour, the summons came. I snatched the receiver instantly. The breathing was there, a familiar phantom. But this time, after a few seconds, it shifted. A low whisper coiled through the line, unintelligible fragments of speech, sibilant murmurs devoid of context. The voice was hushed, nearly swallowed by the sound of respiration. "What do you want?" I asked, the words dry in my throat. The whispering ceased abruptly, replaced once more by the slow, steady breathing. I slammed the handset down, a tightness constricting my chest. Sleep offered no refuge. The urge to silence it became overwhelming. Rising from my bed, I stalked towards the phone, yanked the cord from the wall jack. It slipped out with unnerving ease. I checked the connection point, finding nothing amiss. Carrying the phone like a captured beast, I descended into the cellar's damp chill and deposited it in a far corner. Upstairs, I sought oblivion in sleep. A few fractured hours passed before anxiety jolted me awake near 5. A compulsion drew me downstairs. Was everything normal? The cellar corner was empty. The phone was gone. A frantic search ensued. Behind shelves, within boxes, the storage room yielded nothing. It couldn't be. I must have misplaced it in my fatigue. Returning upstairs, heart pounding, I scanned the living room. There it sat, on the end table, exactly as before, plugged in, silent. The next night, resigned, I left it connected. Control felt like a forgotten language. When it rang, I lifted the handset to the now expected susurrus. Gibberish again, fractured words, disjointed phrases, semantic chaos. I tried to interrupt, to impose order. "Stop calling me. Who are you? Leave me alone." The whispering flowed on, indifferent. But after I shouted, "Stop," a subtle shift occurred. Movement on the other end, like footsteps creaking across wooden floorboards. Then distinctly the sound of a door opening, closing. I held my breath, listening to the silence that followed before hanging up. Night after night, the ritual repeated. The phone, an uninvited nocturnal guest, would shriek at unpredictable hours, always deep in the night. Each time I answered, I was met with either the disembodied breathing or the nonsensical whispering. Sometimes new sounds bled through, faint footsteps pacing, the groan of hinges, a muffled, heart-breaking sob. Sounds with no source, sounds that made my skin crawl. Sleep became a tattered garment. Wakefulness stretched thin. My appetite waned. I tried letting it ring, an act of defiance. It was futile. The piercing buzz persisted, relentless. until I capitulated. If ignored, it simply rang again 10 minutes later. I timed it once, a desperate experiment. Every 10 minutes on the dot until answered. Then the breathing, the senseless litany. I attempted disconnection again, pulled the cord, meticulously coiled it around the phone's base, and locked the device in a hall closet. Safety. Sleep. Then the ringing. Eyes wide, I threw back the covers, flooding the house with light. The sound emanated undeniably from the living room. Trembling, I unlocked the closet. Empty. The phone rested on its usual end table, serenely plugged in. The sheer impossibility threatened to buckle my sanity. I answered, endured the whispers, hung up. Cold sweat traced paths down my spine. Destruction seemed the next logical step. I fetched a hammer, swung it hard against the bakelite casing. Instead of shattering, it met the surface with a dull, unsatisfying thud. The hammer recoiled. Again I struck. Nothing. A screwdriver proved useless. The screws refused purchase. Pliers slipped. The phone remained stubbornly intact, mocking my efforts. Frustration boiled into rage. I cursed the inert object, screamed accusations into the handset. The only reply was the familiar cadence of breath, the stream of hushed gibberish. Disposal, then. I carried it outside, the night air cool against my fevered skin, and dropped it into the unforgiving steel of a trash can, slammed the lid shut. Back inside, doors locked, I surveyed the living room. It was there, on the end table. Its presence was a physical weight, a tightening in my throat. My nights dissolved into a landscape of dread. I'd startle awake hourly, anticipating the ring, sometimes 2 a.m., sometimes 3, occasionally as early as 1 a.m. Predictability was a luxury I no longer possessed. Sleep deprivation became a constant headache, my eyes burning, my body trembling with fatigue. Cotton stuffed in my ears offered no barrier. The ring seemed to vibrate directly in my skull. Blasting music through headphones was equally ineffective. The shrill summons pierced the loudest noise. Leaving the house at night was pointless. Upon return, the phone would inevitably be ringing, waiting. Did anyone else hear it? A tentative question to my neighbor yielded only a confused negative. I stopped asking. Isolation wrapped around me. One particularly brutal night, adrift near 4 a.m., after countless sleepless hours, I pressed the receiver hard against my ear, desperate to decipher the whispers. Low, rapid, fragmented, I strained, hunting for a recognizable word, a coherent phrase, utterly futile. The voice, or voices, it was impossible to tell. Perhaps male, perhaps female, perhaps an amalgam, murmured in a flat monotone, layered, indistinct. Interspersed were tiny gasps, soft moans almost lost beneath the sibilance. I listened for a full minute before speaking. What do you want? My voice aimed for steady, achieved shaky. The whispers continued unperturbed. Stop calling me. No change. I'm going to unplug you, a fractional pause, a skipped beat in the flow, then the murmuring resumed. I slammed the handset down, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. Pacing became my only solace. Every light in the house blazed, pushing back the shadows. Water straight from the kitchen faucet did little to soothe my parched throat. I tried the guest room, a futile change of scenery. The ring permeated walls, seeped through pillows, crushed against my ears. Once I fled to my car, parked blocks away under the sodium glare of a streetlight. Seat reclined, seeking refuge. Minutes later, a phantom ringing echoed in my head. I ignored it. It grew louder, undeniable. I drove aimlessly, the sound pursuing me. Returning home, defeated, I found the phone silent, waiting. Later, inevitably, it rang. This time, the whispers felt louder, closer. Footsteps echoed clearly now, accompanied by the distinct sounds of doors opening, closing, room by room. A phantom searching the house. Ice traced its way up my arms. I hung up immediately. Relocation was another failed strategy. I placed it in the bathroom behind the toilet's cold porcelain. It rang. I answered it there, bare feet on the frigid tiles. The whispers persisted, unchanged. A dull thump echoed in the background, like something heavy dropped onto a table. Hanging up, I fled the bathroom. Moments later, it was back on the living room end table. Removing the cord was a temporary, illusory fix. It always reconnected itself. Darkness became intolerable. I began leaving every light burning throughout the night, craving visibility, needing to see. Sleep, already fractured, became nearly impossible under the constant glare, but it felt marginally safer than the encompassing blackness. I'd sit on the sofa, watching the phone, forcing down snacks to stay awake. My stomach churned with anxiety and processed sugar. My hands trembled when I reached for a glass. My temper frayed thin. I took to yelling at the phone the moment it rang, snatching the receiver mid-shriek, spewing impotent rage into the mouthpiece. The whispers never altered, never acknowledged my fury. Who could I call? A technician? What would I say? My antique phone is haunted. It whispers nonsense and it defies physics. I had no proof, only my unraveling sanity. The phone bore no maker's mark. Its cord was ancient, the wall jack unremarkable. My mobile worked perfectly. This was something else entirely. Sometimes the whispers would cease, leaving only the hollow sound of breathing. Other times, stifled crying seeped through, the sound of adult sorrow desperately contained. The footsteps remained distant, yet menacingly present, varying my tone. Pleading, demanding, questioning, provoked no reaction. Letting the whispers drone on for minutes changed nothing. They were a ceaseless, meaningless tide. Eventually, the pressure against my ear would become unbearable, and I'd hang up. Earplugs were useless. Noise-canceling headphones were breached. Attempting to record the calls with my mobile yielded only silence upon playback. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing captured in the room. My days became gray landscapes of exhaustion. Work suffered, health deteriorated. The phone remained unbreakable, inescapable, relentless. I lost count of the nights, surrendered to the timeless void of the late hours. Eyes stinging, head pounding, limbs shaky. The cycle was absolute. Find the phone. Suffer the calls. Try to resist. Fail. Endure. Repeat. The world outside my windows seemed distant, unreal. Only the phone and the voice and the breathing felt truly present. Tuesday delivered the first postcard, innocuous as a falling leaf until its message pricked the skin. That particular morning remains etched. Early autumn air, crisp enough to make the steam unfurling from my coffee mug a small, cherished comfort. I stood by the kitchen counter, winnowing the mail. Catalogs destined for recycling, envelopes bearing unwelcome demands. When it surfaced, a postcard, utterly plain, depicting some anonymous sun-drenched mountain range I'd never scaled. A mere flick of the wrist nearly consigned it to the junk pile, but an errant impulse stayed my hand. I turned it over. There, inscribed in precise, unfamiliar script, the words, "Waited. Hope the dawn run invigorated you. The crimson shoes are a fine choice." A tremor ran through me. The coffee cup halted its ascent. I had pounded the pavement that morning, laced into my favorite crimson trainers. How? The postmark, a smudge from a city 3 states distant, bore a date nearly 7 days old. Coincidence, I insisted, a chilling one, perhaps. A misdelivery, surely. The card found a dismissive home in a cluttered drawer, yet the unease it seeded lingered, a subtle toxin. Through the rhythm of the day, my gaze kept snagging on passers-by, sifting faces in the urban stream for the watcher I couldn't name. Preposterous, I chided myself. Paranoia spun from a stray piece of mail. One week bled into the next, the incident fading under the weight of routine, until the second postcard materialized. This one showcased a picturesque cafe, foreign and quaint. Fingers betraying a slight tremble, I flipped it. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I absorbed the text. "Your presentation resonated today. Cobalt truly suits your conviction." Ice water sluiced through my veins. That very morning, I had navigated a crucial presentation at the office, fortified by my supposedly lucky cobalt tie. This defied coincidence. Scrutinizing the card yielded nothing. No signature, no return address. The postmark, again days old, hailed from yet another unfamiliar city. How could knowledge precede the event? The weeks that followed brought a steady drip of them. Each postcard flaunted a different idyllic vista, places unconnected to my life. Each bore a message laced with unnerving intimacy. "The new haircut frames your face well." "Heard the argument with your sister was sharp. Families tangle, don't they? Mind that ankle. Perhaps forgo tomorrow's run." Always the postmarks were scattered across the map, always stamped days before the events they described unfolded. It felt as though the sender possessed a window not just into my present, but my immediate future, charting my course before I'd even conceived it. An obsession took root. The postcards became a constellation pinned to my office corkboard, a cryptic map I desperately tried to decode. Patterns eluded me. The locations, Googled into oblivion, remained generic tourist traps, offering no thread to grasp. I began deliberately altering my path, injecting spontaneity into my days, a frantic attempt to sidestep this unseen observer. Futile. The postcards persisted, anticipating every deviation. Ingenious, that detour. The park possesses a certain charm this season. Wouldn't you agree? Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Venturing outside felt like shedding protective skin, leaving me raw and exposed. Every stranger became a potential suspect. The barista crafting my morning brew, the quiet neighbor down the hall, some phantom from my past nursing an unknown grievance. The police offered sympathetic shrugs. Without tangible threats, their hands were tied. Relocating my mailbox, they suggested, though a hollow certainty echoed within me. These messages would find their mark regardless. Desperation led me to hire a private investigator, a Ms. Thorne. Her initial skepticism, professionally veiled, slowly dissolved as the postcards continued their unerring arrival, predicting moments with chilling precision. "I've encountered nothing of this nature," she conceded one afternoon, her gaze sweeping over the collection fanned across her desk. "It's as if they observe you from tomorrow, utterly illogical." We deployed countermeasures, discreet cameras monitoring my apartment's approaches, mail routed through secure channels, even a temporary relocation to a friend's house in another state. It mattered little. Wherever I retreated, the postcards pursued. Their tone shifted, growing sharper, more invasive. "You neglect your mother," her silence echoes with longing. "That skin irritation looks bothersome. Have you tried Melaleuca oil?" "I perceive your fear. You are right to feel it." That last one fractured something within me. I ceased attending work, withdrew from friends. My apartment became a fortress of drawn curtains and amplified sounds, each creak a potential intrusion. The postcards, undeterred, now materialized beneath my door. "Hiding is futile," one declared. "Discovery is inevitable." A captive in my own existence, tormented by whispers from an omniscient stalker. How does one combat an adversary perpetually 10 steps ahead? Months bled away. My job evaporated, connections frayed and snapped. My universe contracted to the fraught space between the front door and the cursed rectangle of paper I retrieved daily with unsteady hands. Then, on a Wednesday draped in gray, the pattern broke. Reaching for the expected postcard, my fingers met not cardstock, but the crisp resistance of a white envelope. My name penned in that hauntingly familiar script. For long moments I simply stared, paralyzed by the dread of its contents. What new torment lay within? Yet the gnawing need for understanding eventually eclipsed the fear. Inside, a single sheet of paper. As I unfolded it, something small and metallic tumbled out. A key. I retrieved it, its cool weight alien in my palm, while my eyes devoured the letter. "You harbor so many questions now. Answers await. This key unlocks locker 3B at the Central train station. Midnight tonight. Arrive unaccompanied, or the truth remains veiled." The words swam, repeating themselves endlessly in my reeling mind. This was the precipice, the offered chance to face my tormentor, to finally grasp the why behind this psychic siege. Yet, could it be trusted? A snare, perhaps? Ultimately, the craving for resolution overpowered the instinct for self-preservation. As midnight painted the city in shades of charcoal and silence, I stood within the echoing vastness of the deserted train station, the key cold against my skin. Locker 3B yielded easily. My breath hitched, bracing for what? An explosion, a trap sprung. Instead, nestled within the small, dark space, lay only a leather-bound journal. Opening it sent my world spinning off its axis. The ink, the handwriting, identical to the postcards. But this was no stranger's chronicle. It was mine. Page after page documented my own thoughts, my experiences, events yet to transpire. The final entry, dated 5 years hence, recounted the discovery of temporal displacement, the subsequent decision to dispatch messages to my past self, an attempt, it seemed, to brace me for coming storms. Impossibility warred with undeniable explanation. The predated postmarks, the impossible foresight. I had been stalking myself. Clutching the journal, A presence coalesced from the station's deep shadows. Recognition dawned even before the light fully illuminated the figure. Me. Older, lines etched deeper by time and worry, but undeniably me. "Forgive me," my future iteration murmured, the voice thick with a sorrow that felt ancient. My intention was preparation, a buffer against shock. I see now I only cultivated pain. "Why?" The single word tore from my throat. "Why orchestrate all this?" I exhaled slowly to avert a catastrophe, one that irrevocably altered our world. I realized too late that in manipulating the past, I was forging the very future I dreaded. We spoke for hours in the hollow cathedral of the station, the future unfurling in her words. Discoveries and devastating losses, a world teetering on the edge of chaos. "What now?" I asked, as the first hints of dawn diluted the darkness. "Now," she replied, her gaze distant, "we allow the current to flow unimpeded. No more messages, no further interference. What is destined will arrive." And then she was simply gone, dissolving back into the nascent light, leaving me solitary with a journal and a mind burdened by impossible knowledge. To claim life returned to normal would be a falsehood. How could it? I had peered into a future conditional, conversed with a version of myself I prayed never to become. The postcard ceased as promised, yet the experience branded me. I navigate my days hyper-aware, each choice weighed, each action scrutinized. Does this path lead toward or away from that haunted reflection? Sometimes the urge to incinerate the journal, to obliterate the foreknowledge and reclaim ignorance is overwhelming, but I cannot. It remains a heavy reminder of time's delicate weave, the gravity of decisions and the perilous folly of attempting to outwit destiny, and occasionally pass in the display of postcards. A familiar chill traces my spine. A silent question surfaces. Is this how it starts? It began as a stain, an almost imperceptible corruption at the furthest edge of the frame. A smudge against the horizon, perhaps, or a fleeting darkness swallowed by a corner's shadow. Yet, with every successive image captured, the stain bled inwards, sharpening, coalescing. By the moment clarity struck, the threshold had already been breached. The figure, born of pixels and light, had seeped from the screen's flat plane into the textured reality of my life. Clara's wedding day unfolded under a sky too blue, unnervingly perfect, the sort of day that feels curated rather than lived. Sunshine lacquered the blooming gardens. Laughter chimed like fragile glass. I, Elias, played the reluctant chronicler, my camera a third eye, harvesting candid bursts of joy. Champagne toasts fizzing, Clara and her new husband tracing ephemeral patterns in their first dance, the petals scattering whirlwind of the flower girl. Hundreds of moments crystallized. Later, bathed in the sterile glow of the display, scrolling through the day's digital harvest, a dissonance snagged my eye. There, in a wide shot of the mingling guests, nestled behind an ostentatious floral cascade, lurked a humanoid silhouette, blurred, indistinct, like motion caught mid-stride, but something felt fundamentally wrong. Its proportions skewed unnaturally. Its outline possessed a razor-sharp definition that defied the soft focus around it. Zooming intensified the unease, fracturing the shape into a meaningless mosaic of pixels. A trick of the light, I reasoned. A phantom limb of a passing server, an easily discarded anomaly. But the anomaly persisted, a recurring stain across the temporal canvas of the celebration. Flipping through the sequence, I watched its insidious evolution. In the early captures from the ceremony, it was nebulous, barely suggestion. By the reception's timeline, however, it had accreted form, the vague curve of a head, the twin anchors of shoulders, the drape of unseen arms. A dread, cold and sharp, pierced the fatigue. My own eyes surely were betraying me. Exhaustion, the late hour, convenient culprits. I shuttered the laptop, seeking refuge in sleep, determined that morning's clarity would dissolve the phantom. Sleep offered no sanctuary, only fractured reels of encroaching darkness, shadowy forms perpetually lurking just beyond the periphery of vision, drawing ever closer with each imagined frame. Morning light brought no relief, only starker terror. With trembling hands, I reopened the digital archive. The figure remained, defiantly present, its resolution somehow enhanced by the passage of night. In the later photographs, the ones documenting the evening's descent into revelry, its features now possessed a horrifying specificity. Depressions where eyes should have been, a stark gash suggesting a mouth, fingers that seemed unnaturally elongated, tipped with sharpness. My breath hitched, shallow and ragged as I navigated the images. With each click, it advanced, pushing through the oblivious, smiling faces frozen in time, migrating inexorably towards the foreground. The final frame nearly stopped my heart's frantic rhythm. It was Clara, luminous in her gown, captured mid-toast, her face radiant, and directly behind her, the aberration materialized, stark and complete, a nightmarish effigy of humanity. Its skeletal hand extended, poised millimeters from her shoulder, a gesture of chilling intimacy. The laptop snapped shut, a guillotine severing the image. Panic seized my lungs. This defied reality. Photographs weren't mutable entities. Shadow things didn't quicken into being, stalking the subjects of celebratory snapshots. Yet the evidence burned behind my eyelids, accompanied by a certainty frigid and absolute. This was merely the overture. Weeks dissolved into a fever of scrutiny. Hours bled away, analyzing the cursed images, trawling the digital depths for explanations. Photographic glitches, pareidolia, spectral encounters, anything to anchor the impossible in the mundane. But the deeper I delved, the more virulent the infestation became. The figure began its temporal migration, appearing not just in the wedding album, but contaminating older captures, sun-drenched vacation stills, casual selfies snapped with friends, even posed studio portraits, always lurking initially, a subtle wrongness in the background, but relentlessly, photograph by photograph, drawing nearer. I ceased capturing moments. Tape blinded my phone's lens. Every framed photograph vanished from my apartment walls. Futile gestures, inexplicably, new images materialized on my devices. Phantom photographs I hadn't taken, documenting the figure's intrusion into my private spaces. My home, my sterile office cubicle, the shadowed corner of my bedroom as I slept. Concern from loved ones curdled into pity, then frustration. My frantic explanations sounded like the ravings of a mind unraveling. Stress, they suggested gently, sleeplessness, perhaps a delayed grief over Clara's inevitable post-wedding relocation. Their eyes scanned the photos I thrust at them, seeing only normalcy, oblivious to the predator hiding in plain sight. Sanity felt like a shoreline receding under an inexorable tide. Was it delusion, a catastrophic psychic fracture? Yet, just as I'd managed to grasp onto a sliver of rational denial, the evidence would reassert itself. A flicker of impossible movement glimpsed in a polished surface, a shadow stretching where none should fall, the prickling certainty of unseen eyes fixed upon me in the solitude of my own rooms. The rupture occurred on a desolate street, late one night, returning from a draining shift. The city exhaled emptiness. My footsteps were the sole percussion on the pavement. Passing the darkened, reflective void of a shop-front window, I saw it. No longer confined to the digital realm, but rendered with terrifying clarity in the glass. Standing directly behind me, I whirled, heart detonating against my ribs. The street yawned, vacant. But turning back to the obsidian mirror, it was still there, closer now. Close enough to discern the texture of its skin, like crazed, ancient ceramic. Close enough to perceive the depthless void where eyes belonged. The lipless fissure stretching into a silent, agonized scream. Flight became instinct, raw and desperate. I ran until agony scorched my lungs, until my legs threatened to buckle. Sanctuary was an illusion, but I sought it anyway behind the locked door of my apartment. Every light blazing against the encroaching shadows, huddled in a corner like a cornered animal. I knew with chilling finality it wasn't enough. Its presence pulsed, a palpable weight in the air, strengthening. It had traversed the frames, the moments, the very fabric separating image from reality. There was no hiding place left. As I sat trembling, awaiting the inevitable conclusion, my phone vibrated against the floorboards, a death knell, a new photo notification. Hands shaking uncontrollably, I unlocked the screen. An image, time-stamped mere seconds ago. Me, cowering in the corner, bathed in the harsh glare of the ceiling light. And there, unfurling from the deepest shadows behind me, was the figure, its ceramic hand reaching mere inches from my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. In that frozen instant, acceptance arrived, cold and absolute. It had pursued me across time and space, through every captured fragment of my existence, and now, finally, it had arrived. As the glacial touch of porcelain-like fingers grazed my shoulder, a single detached thought surfaced. I wonder if anyone will notice it, lurking in the photographs they'll eventually take of this empty room. Then the world dissolved into absolute darkness. The final shutter clicked. It ripped through the evening quiet. A shriek scraped raw, utterly devoid of humanity. The sound wasn't merely loud, it was a violation, freezing the blood in my veins, momentarily stilling the frantic pulse in my chest. I stood paralyzed in the neighbor's living room, the brass key to her front door suddenly feeling alien and heavy in my trembling palm. In that instant, the mundane task of checking on a house fractured, revealing something coiled and venomous beneath. The arrangement had begun with such benign simplicity. Mrs. Agnes Thorne, the architect of meticulously crafted kindness residing next door, needed someone to mind her cottage while she visited her daughter for a week. Naturally, I agreed. 3 years of neighborly proximity had woven a tapestry of small courtesies, her offering fragrant home-baked confections, my retrieving her wind-scattered mail. The initial days unfolded with predictable tranquility. Morning visits before my commute to replenish the food bowl for Jasper, her sleek black cat. Evening stops to ensure all was well, punctuated by the soft friction of Jasper rubbing against my ankles. Mrs. Thorne's house was a capsule of studied quaintness. Lace doilies starched stiff upon dark wood, wallpaper blooming with faded roses, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of lavender potpourri. It was the very picture of benign grandmotherhood, perhaps a touch too perfect. But on the fourth evening, the picture warped. Twilight bled across the manicured lawns, stretching shadows into unfamiliar shapes along the hushed suburban lane. Approaching Mrs. Thorne's tidy bungalow, an anomaly snagged my attention. The heavy damask curtains of the front window were drawn tight. A deviation. Mrs. Thorne cherished the fading light, always leaving them open until dusk fully settled, dismissing it as feline mischief. Perhaps Jasper entangled in the fabric. I turned the key. The lock clicked open. "Jasper?" I called into the entryway, the name swallowed by an unnerving stillness. "Kitty, where are you?" The house returned only silence, dense and watchful. Usually Jasper would materialize, a shadow weaving around my legs, purring for his expected tribute of affection or treats. Tonight, nothing stirred. A cold knot tightened low in my stomach as I ventured deeper. The living room lay submerged in gloom. My fingers found the switch, and pale light flooded the space, revealing not tranquility, but violence scribbled across the room. Picture frames lay face down, their glass fractured. Shards of a porcelain vase glittered like frost on the carpet, and across the floral-patterned armchair, deep gouges tore through the fabric, far too savage for Jasper's claws. My heart hammered against my ribs. A break-in? Yet incongruously, nothing of obvious value seemed disturbed. The television remained. Mrs. Thorne's cherished silver tea service gleamed untouched on its sideboard. My mobile felt slippery in my hand as I prepared to dial emergency services. Then I heard it. A faint, insistent scratching emanating from behind the basement door. "Jasper?" My voice emerged thin, quavering. "Is that you?" The scratching ceased instantly. Silence stretched taut before being ripped apart by a low, guttural growl that prickled the hairs on my nape. That sound was ancient, predatory, and definitively not feline. Every instinct screamed retreat, flee, call for help from the safety of the street. Yet a morbid cocktail of curiosity and a misplaced concern for the missing cat anchored me to the spot. Slowly, inexorably, I moved toward the basement door, the growling intensifying with each step, vibrating through the floorboards. My hand, shaking violently, hovered over the tarnished brass knob. A ragged breath hitched in my throat. I turned it. The door didn't merely open. It exploded inward with astonishing force, striking me like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, landing hard, the back of my skull connecting sharply with the polished floor. Stars burst behind my eyes. Through a swimming haze, a shape emerged from the Stygian darkness below. Large, hunched, moving with a fluid, disjointed gait that defied natural locomotion. It was a silhouette stitched from shadow and wrongness. As my vision struggled to clear, details resolved themselves into a tableau of nightmare. Ropes of matted, indeterminate fur, limbs that buckled where joints shouldn't be, and eyes, twin points of baleful yellow incandescence burning in the dimness. This entity belonged to no known taxonomy, less beast than a fever dream given flesh, a grotesque collage of predatory forms. I scrambled backward on hands and elbows, pure, unthinking terror, propelling me across the floor. My heart felt like a trapped bird battering against my ribs. The creature advanced not with speed, but with a terrifying deliberateness. Thick saliva glistening on jaws that seemed disproportionately vast for its skull. Those luminous eyes remained fixed on mine, radiating a chilling, predatory intelligence. And then came the scream, the same sound that had first paralyzed me, but now unleashed at close range. It tore from the creature's throat, its maw stretching impossibly wide, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish that resonated deep within my bones, threatening to unravel my sanity. That shockwave of sound somehow broke my paralysis. Adrenaline surged and I found my feet, launching myself toward the front door in a sprint fueled by primal fear. Behind me, the scrape and click of claws on hardwood echoed my frantic flight. I reached the door, my fingers clumsy and numb as they fumbled with the deadlock. Just as a wave of fetid heat washed over the back of my neck, I wrenched the door open and tumbled out into the cool night air. I slammed the heavy oak panel shut. The impact followed immediately by a sickening thud from the other side as the creature collided with the wood. I didn't pause. I ran, not stopping until I reached the sanctuary of my own porch, fumbling with my own keys, finally collapsing against the locked door. Breath tearing through my lungs in ragged gasps. My mind spun, grappling with the sheer impossibility of what I had witnessed. Such things didn't exist. They were phantoms conjured for campfire tales, celluloid nightmares. Yet the image, those glowing eyes, the impossible anatomy, the sound, was seared onto my consciousness. With fingers that still shook uncontrollably, I called the police, struggling to relay the events without sounding utterly unhinged. Their skepticism crackled over the line, but they promised to dispatch a patrol car. As I waited, staring at the dark house next door, a truly horrifying thought surfaced. Agnes Thorne. What if she decided to return early? What if that thing was still loose inside? I had to warn her. I found her number, my thumb hovering over the digits before pressing dial. Her familiar, cheerful hello sounded jarringly normal, a transmission from a world I no longer inhabited. "Mrs. Thorne," I managed, my voice brittle. Are you still with your daughter?" "Why, yes, Alara dear. Is everything quite all right? You sound rather distressed." A beat of hesitation. How to articulate the monstrous reality? "There's something in your house. Something dangerous. Please don't come home yet. The police are on their way." A profound silence stretched across the line, heavy and unnerving. When Agnes Thorne spoke again, all warmth had bled from her voice, leaving it flat, hollow. "Oh dear," she said, the tone chillingly devoid of emotion. "You weren't supposed to discover it like this." Ice traced a path down my spine. "Discover what? What do you mean?" "That presence you encountered. That's my son, Alara, Silas. He has particular requirements. I was certain I had secured the basement door before departing." Nausea surged. "Your son? Mrs. Thorne, that thing, it wasn't human." She released a long, weary sigh. "No, I suppose he isn't. Not precisely, not anymore. There was an incident, you understand, many years ago. Silas developed certain interests. The esoteric, darker pathways. An experiment went awry. Catastrophically awry. My mind fractured under the weight of it. This placid street, this kindly woman. But why keep him locked away? Why not seek assistance?" A short, bitter laugh crackled through the phone. "What manner of assistance caters to this, Alara? No, containment was the sole recourse. I've managed somehow all these years, but it grows more taxing as I age, which is why I imposed upon you, dear. I thought, perhaps in time, you might be willing to help." The implication struck with physical force. The house-sitting, the extended visits away. It hadn't been mere convenience. It had been an audition, a gradual, horrifying grooming process intended to eventually pass the burden of Silas onto me. Before I could form a response, the distant wail of sirens sliced through the night. The police were close. "I have to go," I said hastily. "They're here." "No." Agnes Thorne's voice sharpened, laced with sudden panic. "You mustn't let them find Silas. Alara, please, you have to keep him safe." I ended the call, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. Outside, strobing blue and red lights painted the houses in frantic patterns. I watched from my window as officers approached Mrs. Thorne's home, weapons drawn, their movements cautious, methodical. A moment of tense silence hung in the air, then shattered as that same soul-rending scream echoed once more into the night. Shouts erupted, the sharp crack of gunfire, more of those terrible, inhuman shrieks. I slid to the floor, hands clamped over my ears, trying desperately to block out the sounds of the chaos, unfolding just yards away. My quiet, predictable life had irrevocably tipped into a nightmare. Eventually, an exhausted silence fell. When I finally summoned the nerve to look again, Mrs. Thorne's house was illuminated by floodlights, wrapped in yellow police tape like a grotesque gift. Ambulances waited, their back doors open. Figures moved, carrying shrouded burdens. Later, a detective with weary eyes came to my door. I recounted everything. The house sitting, the drawn curtains, the basement, the creature, the chilling phone call with Agnes. He listened intently, his expression grim, making occasional notes in a small pad. "You're incredibly fortunate to be alive," he stated flatly when I finished. "We lost 3 officers in there, whatever that thing was. Extraordinary strength. Vicious." "Did you—" I hesitated, unsure if I wanted the answer. "Did you stop it?" His face hardened. "Unclear. There was significant blood loss, but no body recovered. Indications suggest it may have escaped into the woods, bordering the property. We have teams conducting a search." Sleep became a foreign country that night and in the weeks that followed. My waking hours were a blur of official interviews, unwelcome media attention, and the constant gnawing replay of glowing yellow eyes. Agnes Thorne was apprehended upon her return, charged with a litany of offenses, including multiple counts of homicide and unlawful imprisonment. through it all, she maintained she was merely protecting her son. Silas was never found. Sometimes when the night is exceptionally still, I imagine I hear faint, mournful howls drifting from the dark woods beyond the neat suburban fences. On those nights, I meticulously check the locks on my doors and windows, drawing the curtains tight against the darkness. The quaint house next door, the sweet old woman with her lavender sachets and sleek black cat, they were a mask, hiding a horror almost beyond comprehension. Now every walk down my familiar street is tainted by suspicion. I look at the peaceful facades, the manicured lawns, and wonder what other secrets fester behind closed doors, what other monsters, human or otherwise, wait patiently just out of sight. One thing is certain, my house-sitting days are definitively over. A stuttering pulse of crimson neon fractured the oppressive dark, promising shelter and cable above the Larkspur Inn. As my tires crunched over the loose gravel drive, the advertised comforts were distant thoughts. Only the siren song of a scalding shower and oblivion on a pillow resonated. Checking into this dilapidated roadside relic, adrift on a sea of exhaustion, would unravel into the longest, most harrowing night of my existence. Endless hours had bled together, the highway a monotonous ribbon unreeling into blackness, my eyelids gritty sandpaper, the sun a forgotten memory, headlights carved fleeting tunnels through the void. Then the Larkspur Inn materialized. Less an oasis, more a persistent mirage, finally solidifying. Peeling paint, a marquee studded with dead bulbs. Such details dissolved against the overwhelming need for respite. It was shelter, nothing else mattered. The reception office breathed a stale miasma of ancient cigarette smoke, struggling against cheap pine disinfectant. Behind the scarred Formica counter, a woman stood, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, yet offering a smile that seemed practiced, welcoming. Agnes, her name tag read. She slid the key to room 8 across the counter, murmuring wishes for a pleasant rest. Gratitude, thick with fatigue, choked any attempt at conversation. Room 8 was compact, smelling faintly of bleach and thyme, but mercifully tidy. My duffel landed on the questionable floral bedspread. The bathroom beckoned. Water coughed reluctantly from the showerhead, never achieving true heat, settling for a tepid apology. Still, it sluiced away miles of grime. Toweling off, my gaze snagged on a brochure resting beside the lamp. A journey through Larkspur history. Circa 1950s, it proclaimed, showcasing faded Kodachrome smiles of bygone vacationers. I thumbed through, weary eyes catching a paragraph tucked away under local curiosities and mentions of guests who, over the decades, had simply vanished, chalked up to the transient nature of the road, campfire tales. A dry chuckle escaped me. Every forgotten corner seemed to cultivate its own ghost stories. I surrendered to the lumpy mattress, surfing the snowy static between channels on the antique television before sleep finally claimed me. Around the stroke of midnight, a whisper of sound nudged me awake. Footfalls in the corridor, tentative, shuffling. Dragging myself up, I squinted through the warped eye of the peephole. Nothing but the jaundiced glow of the hallway light on peeling wallpaper. Another weary traveler, I reasoned, sinking back into the thin pillows. But slumber remained elusive. An unease permeated the room, a palpable density in the air I couldn't articulate. My thoughts kept snagging on the pamphlet's casual mention of the disappeared, images flickering behind my closed lids, faces checking in, shadows checking out. Just as exhaustion began to reclaim me, a distinct click echoed softly in the stillness. My eyes snapped open, darting through the gloom. There, tucked high in the corner, almost lost in shadow behind the grimy air conditioning vent, a minuscule, winking ruby point of light. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I rose, compelled forward, breath held tight. A camera, miniature, malevolent. Ice water flooded my veins. A frantic, silent search ensued. Another lens, a dark cyclopean eye, peered from behind a cheap landscape painting above the dresser. Violation crawled under my skin. Who? Why? My hand scrabbled for my phone, dialing emergency services even as the screen displayed the damning truth. No signal. Utterly, terrifyingly isolated. Escape was the only imperative. Clothes were thrown on haphazardly, silence abandoned. My bag was snatched. As my fingers closed around the cool metal of the doorknob, the footsteps returned, louder now, quicker, imbued with unnerving purpose. I froze, hand suspended. They stopped directly outside. A pregnant, suffocating silence descended, broken only by a gentle, almost hesitant knock. "Everything satisfactory in there, sir." Agnes, her voice previously just tiredly pleasant, now dripped with a cloying, counterfeit sweetness. Silence was my only reply. My heart thundered, a frantic drum against the thin wood separating us. "We noticed you were stirring," she continued, the plural pronoun landing like a blow. "We just wanted to see if you required anything." Still, I held my ground, praying for her retreat. Instead, the faint metallic jingle of keys reached my ears. "I'll just let myself in. Make sure you're quite all right, dear." Panic detonated within me. I wrenched the door inward, catching her off balance. She stumbled, the key glinting in her grasp. Looming behind her stood a figure unseen before. Tall, broad, his face impassive, like granite roughly hewn. "Oh," Agnes chirped, regaining her composure with unnerving speed. "You gave me a start. Is something amiss?" I forced a nod, my voice a strained imitation of calm. "No, fine, just stepping out. Needed some air." Her smile was a painted rictus. It never touched the cold calculation in her eyes. "At this hour, it's rather desolate out. Perhaps come to the office. We can brew some calming tea." The man, Silas, his presence seemed to silently scream, remained rooted, his gaze pinning me like an insect. My grip tightened on my bag. "Thank you, no. A quick drive should clear my head." I attempted to sidestep them, but Silas shifted, a silent, immovable wall blocking the corridor. "I don't believe that would be wise," he intoned, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with menace. In that instant, the charade dissolved. This was not hospitality, it was capture. Instinct took over. I shoved past Agnes, bolting down the hallway toward the distant promise of the exit sign. Their footsteps pounded behind me, echoing ominously in the narrow space. I burst through the door into the cool, indifferent night. The parking lot stretched before me, unnervingly vacant save for my solitary vehicle. As I sprinted towards it, Agnes's voice pursued me, shrill and chilling. "You can't check out, dear. Nobody ever checks out." My keys trembled violently in my hand, refusing the lock. Just as the tumblers clicked, a heavy hand clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around. Silas. His face was a mask of fury. "Shouldn't have noticed the little watchers," he snarled. Thought evaporated, pure reflex governed. My knee drove upward, connecting sharply. He gasped, doubling over, releasing his grip. I scrambled into the driver's seat, the key finding the ignition. The engine roared, a defiant sound in the stillness. Tires spat gravel as I tore out of the Larkspur Inn's clutches. In the rear-view mirror, two figures stood starkly illuminated by the motel's dying neon, shrinking into the darkness, watching me flee. Mile after frantic mile unspooled. My heart hammered a rhythm against my ribs, my eyes glued to the mirror, searching for phantom headlights. Only when the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the eastern sky did the terror recede enough for me to pull into the brightly lit sanctuary of a sprawling truck stop. The call to the police felt surreal. I recounted the night's events, the cameras, the chilling pursuit. They listened, took notes, promised an investigation, but skepticism laced their professional courtesy. Hidden cameras in a decaying motel, likely just some sordid voyeurism, they implied. But the cold certainty lingered within me. It was deeper, darker than mere perversion. The way they'd tried to detain me, Agnes's final, terrifying pronouncement, something profoundly sinister festered within those walls. What became of the others, the vanished guests mentioned in faded print? The official inquiry yielded nothing tangible, citing insufficient proof. The Larkspur Inn remained, a blight on the roadside, its vacancy sign still flickering its false promise into the night. Yet I carry the truth, a chilling knowledge of the smiles that mask predation, the silence that conceals horrors. And now, whenever the lonely highway presents another flickering motel sign, my foot presses harder on the accelerator, my knuckles white on the wheel, because the darkness holds watchers, waiting patiently for the next traveler to seek shelter, unaware they might never depart.